EDM in Healthcare to Get It Right webinar. We are very excited to have you join us. This is a webinar recording from our Solutions 21 conference back in November. But at the end of our session, we have the esteemed and longtime EDM expert Darren Polino from Oracle with us to answer questions live after the session is over. So again, we're looking at EDM and collaborating on data today. This is specific to healthcare, but a lot of these concepts can be applied to various verticals. So very grateful to have you join us. And with that, I will start our session.
Again, my name is Darren Polino. I've been here with Oracle for a number of years. We'll have a little safe harbor statement here. Basically, what that means is that I'm not really going to be talking about product direction today. Raul, who's speaking tomorrow at 9 o'clock, I think Pacific time, he'll be covering more of the product direction. But as you know, within Oracle, they do reserve the right to change up the direction of the product, things of that nature. So, but with that said, we'll go ahead and we'll get right into the session here. I have a number of things that I'm going to be covering for everyone from a perspective of the agenda. What is EDM? I'm going to spend a little bit more time maybe on what it isn't, because a number of clients sometimes get confused on EDM. I'm going to talk about exploiting the value of EDM. And I actually intentionally particularly picked that word, exploiting. And you'll see that as you go through the deck here, why I picked that, because I think there's a lot of untapped value that many of our clients that use EDM haven't leveraged yet. So we'll get into some examples of that. We'll also talk about different examples of EDM and analogies that I present so that when you're talking to internal team members, how you can communicate what enterprise data management is. We'll also cover a little bit about some Excel comparisons, which is the typical way most people do things today. We'll also get into some healthcare examples, some implementation pitfalls. So we've had a number of clients implement this, not just across healthcare, but across all industries. So we'll cover that as well. And then lastly, some licensing considerations, as well as concluding thoughts and Q&A. So with that, let's go ahead and get rolling. My first analogy for everyone I just want to share with, and this actually came from a client. So I'm going to actually give that client, a little bit of credit that we're working with. It's one of our existing or clients that we're working with on EDM. And she told me, she grabbed me and she said, for us, when we're deploying something, it's like designing a future freeway system, and part of the challenge that you get into is you have to keep your existing systems operational. So it's just like you have to keep that existing freeway open. Maybe you reduce it down to one lane as you're redesigning that freeway and making it wider or larger to handle more volume, but you still have to keep the existing assets operational. And there's this phase of when you're converting from one system over to another that becomes a carefully orchestrated symphony of construction that might be going on. And so as you're designing the future applications, whether that's ERP or you're looking at modernizing your Hyperion environment or moving to EPM, or even some of the other systems that might be out there, like a clinical system or time and attendance system, whether it's cloud or on-prem, you often go through this design phase session where you spend time implementing, thinking about what you're going to implement. And along the way, what happens is that you go through this conversion process. And that conversion sometimes can be very challenging and difficult because of the fact that you have to bring the road down to a single lane while you're converting over to and building this new freeway. Well, with EDM, one of the things that we like to use from an analogies perspective is we like to make this process to help assist in this process to make it faster, right? So that we're not in that whole long construction delay process, but to make sure we're doing it efficiently, keeping all the areas in lanes maximized as being open. And we'll have a little bit deeper analogies as we get into this whole road analogy as we go through it. But what is EDM? So EDM, for many of you, that since this is a Hyperion Solutions conference, you probably know the Hyperion Data Relationship Management Solution and the Data Relationship Steward that you may have heard before. Some of the acronyms we have, DRM, DRG, those have been out there for years. And EDM is really that particular solution reimagined in the cloud. And it is seriously reimagined, because the approach of how we implement it and take it to market and how our clients are using it is very different than what we traditionally seen with our DRM customers. That said, it's also a broad new user base of users that now have access to EDM that you might want to include if you are a traditional DRM user. So just some food for thought there as we go through this presentation and talk about the different benefits that you see with moving to EDM and how your business community can become more collaborative using this particular solution together. So when I describe, or actually before we get into that, I just want to cover a little bit of additional information about EDM that you can go to, especially from a resource standpoint. So if you are new to EDM and you're watching this presentation and you're not quite sure of like where you can get additional information, I have a lot of available information, whether it's webinars that are out there that we have gone through and shown like the differences between DRM and EDM. We also have thought leadership series. We have a series which we call the data first strategy that's been out there. All these have been recorded. There's even embedded demonstrations on EDM and how it is used, and you can get a good sense of what that particular solution, and get yourself a foundation around EDM as to how it's used within your environment there. There's also a lot of blogs, and the blogs are either from Oracle people or even from customers that we have out there that gives you an idea of how they have utilized this technology within their own environment. But again, just giving a little heads up, there will be a session tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time, 11 Central, where our product management team will be on the session here and presenting about EDM and what's new. And there's been a lot of new capabilities, and they continue to push out capabilities. And that's why we call it what's new and what's next with EDM. So you can really dive into those feature function capabilities around that. And again, if you need to contact me, I got my email address listed here. You also notice it's down in the bottom left-hand corner. So I'm going to go ahead and do my laser pointer, and you can see it down here. I'll have that throughout the slide deck so that if you want to email me, if you have questions, if you want some of these links that you would like to review, definitely go ahead and send me an email. Be aware also, we have a lot of upcoming series around educational events on EDM. So we will definitely be over in the next few months pushing out a lot of information, a lot of opportunities for webinars where you can join to get more insight into how EDM is being used by existing client base. Our client base has been growing rapidly, so we're seeing more and more examples of how EDM is being helpful for many of our customers that are out there. So what is not EDM, right? So that's sometimes a challenge for clients because they sit there and they go, okay, enterprise data management, I'm not sure quite where this fits in around this. Well, EDM is not ERP. That's pretty evident, all right? I think most people know that. It's also not EPM, although it is part of the EPM suite inside of Oracle as far as how we bundle and package things together typically, but it is not EPM. So that's another key differentiator. And the last thing which sometimes catches people off guard is I like to say EDM is not integration. So per se, and I say that for a reason, is because many times clients think of EDM as integration, but what they're really missing is that it's really focused on collaboration. It's collaboration and communication on metadata. And so this is shared data between different teams or individuals or assets or applications where that data is important to act on, to monitor, to govern, and even track for auditing purposes. So that's what you really got to think about EDM as. And typically we focus around the financial chart of accounts. I'm not going to shy away from that. That's been our core for many years when we had DRM. And it's still our core as we've gone into EDM, of just really helping finance improve the operations. And this becomes that core backbone, that chart of account data is the core backbone to the analytics, which we use to make many of our decisions. So let's go back to our freeway analogy. One of the things when we're thinking about analytics and all the data that's out there is that when you look at a freeway system, what a freeway system is really is it's a series of interconnections, intersections that are going on. But with a freeway system, and even just a common road that's out there, there's rules to the road that we have learned as we drive a car, or we got our license when we were 16 years old. And those rules are things like, what's the speed limit? What lanes can I travel in? Do I stay in the middle of the lane, or do I cross that yellow line or white line? And we know those rules because we've been taught those. And the same thing happens with data. So when we start to think about different data elements, there's rules when it comes to data and putting it in systems and sharing it across the applications. And that's where EDM's sweet spot is around all these rules of the road, as we like to think of. So if I was to continue that analogy and try to explain, what is EDM really doing in enterprise data management? Well, it's governing and sharing that important metadata around the road itself. And so the properties or attributes of a simple common road might be things like, okay, what's the speed limit for this road? What's the weight limit? How high can I bring a vehicle across it? What's the width? What direction am I going? Go north or south, right? And the number of lanes, the class of road, the function of road, type of road. You can really go to town about the different attributes that could be shared about this particular set of information. And this data gets shared across different applications or individuals. So if I'm a truck driver and I need to deliver a large load, I need to know the rules of the road, of which roads I'm allowed to drive on to bring my load to its destination without violating any laws. So the important thing is to understand who owns different sets of the data. So the speed limit might be owned by the police officers, and they define, what the speed limit is. But the weight limit might be owned and defined by the engineers that build the bridges, because they're going to understand what's the weight limit of this particular bridge. And then how do we maintain all these intersections of data where we have data crossing each other? So in roads crossing each other, we have data that intersects with each other. And sometimes there's different properties and attributes that we need to capture about that. And so how do we maintain all this information and make sure that we're communicating out to everybody to keep everyone going in the same direction on the same road, or importantly, that we're not crashing into each other, right? So with that said, of course, now my PC doesn't want to participate. There we go. This happens to be an image of one of the favorite roads that I like, and it's actually two freeway systems. And some of you might actually recognize this, but it's the Florida Turnpike and I-95. Now, for those of you that have not traveled to South Florida and understand this particular sequence, there's two freeways that are literally right next to each other. And what's interesting, at some points they even cross over each other, but they don't really do interconnections with each other, but they both head in the same direction. So to me, it's really a great analogy of understanding how sometimes data within systems have to live in parallel with each other, but then there's sometimes intersections here. Now, this particular intersection happens to be in Jupiter, Florida, which is probably one of the easiest spots to get off the turnpike and onto I-95, or vice versa, depending on which way you're going. But it's still, you have to get on multiple roads to get off one freeway system onto another, as far as this set of data. But it also makes me understand and acknowledge that, even though we might be going in the same direction from a business standpoint, we could totally be on two different sets of roads when it comes to our data. And so that's why I really like this analogy when we're talking about enterprise data management, because we want to make sure everybody, if we're going to pick a common road that we're going down from a standards and consistency standpoint, let's stay on that road, keep everyone going in the same direction there. So,
Darren, sorry to interrupt. I may have missed this, but did you happen to answer? There was a question.
Oh, I did not see the question. Okay, I see it there. Let me pop it open.
Can we use EDM with on-prem Hyperion and on-prem EBS?
Yes, absolutely. So, and we can cover some of that. One of the things that you'll hear about is we have pre-built adapters for EDM, and we do have a pre-built adapter for our EBS solution that you could definitely leverage and look into, as well as there's also pre-built adapters for our cloud planning solution that I've heard that some of our clients have actually been able to take and point down to some of the Hyperion solutions and bring up the data from there as well too. And we also have this concept called a universal adapter, which allows us to connect into any particular set of data. Hopefully that answers the question there. If you do have more questions about that, just feel free to go ahead and post up another question there in the Q&A session. So with that, thanks for the question. I appreciate that. Let's talk about value just for a few minutes, because one of the things that if you're looking at an enterprise data management solution is you want to build a value use case internally for your teams and for management, and understand where that value comes from. And obviously, you know, I don't really need to define value here, but I like to throw it up because it's a good point just to always reference back to. So it's a measure of benefit provided by a good or service. So data by itself, if we just throw data out there, it really doesn't provide value for us. But when we start to combine data together, some people like to call it blending of data, we start to see these intersections of where the data overlaps with each other. And from there, we can start to provide context and meaning. We can interpret these intersections of data and then tie it in with our real life examples that we know and understand about that data. And that starts to create information for us that we start to make informed decisions on. And so there's a time and economic benefit there from a value standpoint of understanding these different intersections of data, of maybe taking data from different systems and bringing it together. And so this is really important in the healthcare community right now, because, you know, there's a big focus on unifying data across the HR platforms, the finance, supply chain, and clinical systems to really get deeper insight. And that drives all the way down to, you know, segmenting the data out itself from like cost centers and people-person structures and other reporting dimensions that you need to get into. So from what I like to present when it comes to areas of value from an EDM perspective, I like to think of in two high-level categories. One is for the finance and business users that are out there, and the other one is from an IT perspective. From the finance and business users, we like to think in terms of authority, agility, and accuracy. Authority is that this person who's requesting a change or wants to have this data, you know, maybe modified or create a new department or something like that, they have the authority to do so. Agility is being able to capture all that information quickly and process it through that you can rapidly change if you need to. For example, like a COVID-related event, you needed to change on a dime real quick, and your systems had to adapt with you. And then accuracy is just keeping everybody on the same page. Whether I'm defining a new clinic in my clinical systems, well, I want to see if I can get the same alignment in our financial system so that when we do reporting, the business users aren't looking at some structure of data and going, what is this particular clinic over here, when over on the clinical side, we use a totally different name. So let's not get confused as far as how we're defining naming standards. The other area is from an IT perspective, which is coordination, communication, collaboration. Coordination is basically, if I'm making a change here, there potentially is a ripple effect to other systems of that particular change that's being invoked, whether it's a new department, new cost center, things of that nature. We also want to make sure that we're communicating effectively across the different teams and the applications to make sure that they're being updated at the appropriate time when those changes are occurring. And then lastly, importantly, is we have to have collaboration. This is allowing the business owners who own the data to come in and actually be able to act on that data, improve those changes that are getting communicated across the board as far as, you know, what they want the vision of the company to be going through and how that needs to be brought into the current systems. So when we tie this back all into EDM, you know, I love to give this example is, you know, many times our clients, they'll be working in their current year, but they have to start planning for the future year. And one of the requirements might be is that they maybe enter in a new, a new department request. Well, if we think about that road analogy and we bring that over to department data, you know, there's a number of things we have to understand of this department, you know, like, for example, the department number, or what's the parent for it, or what group does it belong into? You know, maybe there's some financial data in there, like an allocation method that needs to be put in, or a department description, or, you know, does it require a facility or people, or, you know, other areas, or who's just the owner of this department? And so when we start to think of those 3 A's and 3 C's that I mentioned around authority, agility, accuracy, communication, coordination, and collaboration, you know, who's requesting this? What is the purpose for it? How fast can I react to it? And what options do I have? Maybe I have an existing department that'll feed that would fulfill my business user's requirement. Are we ensuring accuracy, as far as the inconsistency as they're populating in the information? Are we validating it? Or which systems need to be notified of this change, this potential change that's coming? And then how do I communicate that out? Who needs to be notified of it? Maybe there's different team members that need to be a part of the approval process, but others that just need to be notified. And then what other information needs to be gathered? So many times, as I mentioned, is we have a ripple effect. So if I add a new department, well, that might imply I need a new cost center, new operating unit, or something like that. And so there's a ripple effect of other sets of data that also might need to be taken into consideration. So we think about that as what other additional information needs to be gathered. So how do we do this today? Well, many times the A's and C's are covered through Excel. I mean, I've been in this role for 5 years, and pretty much across the board, almost every client I've been in front of has some form of Excel where they're capturing some of this data, whether it's hierarchy information or it's, their segment numbering, or it's, whatever else. And then some of the other clients have started to get more mature and bring in solutions like SharePoint. So now they're moving Excel sheets up to the SharePoint site, and they're controlling who can go in and access and do those requests. I'm starting to see ServiceNow out there, which is more of an IT request function. It doesn't necessarily help the business gather all the requirements they need around the financial data, though. And as well as there's a number of other solutions out there that, try to dabble in this particular area, whether they're master data management solutions, but they really don't have that insight around financials and the interdependencies and the ripple effect that occurs when you're making financial changes. So the issues with managing data in Excel, which is probably the most common one out there, is it can be error prone. Let's be honest, unless you've really gone in and spent a lot of time codifying it, you can get a lot of errors that start to pop up. It can lack audit history. You can lose your current copy, who has it, who's got control of that. This naming standards can be, weak at best in some cases. And then when you start to get a complex set of matrix data, it really becomes manually intensive. And the Excel management becomes an IT burden by itself, And so those are some of the common areas or challenges that we see with managing data in Excel. And when we think about it, why is this such a problem? Well, again, going back to that new department, I'm bringing that new department across, I might have from a legacy system where we have a company number and a department number, and it's a 7-digit code that creates that segment strategy. But then, as I roll in, our new cloud ERP, well, we decided to change the design a little bit because we need to get a little bit more granular on our reporting. So now it's going to be company, operating unit, and cost center that makes up our company department combinations that we had in the past. So now I got to create a mapping between those two. But then I also got to start to determine, how am I going to do financial close, and how am I going to communicate those things over to that? Or which one are we going to put in the budgeting system? Or, how are we going to communicate this out to our workforce planning solution that's still dependent on our legacy data that we had in our legacy ERP? And again, that's where you see EDM starts to step into that space to help you manage all these different sets of data that are out there. So the requirements are just more than capturing the properties, but it's just having an understanding that multiple systems can be in play, and that you can have different requirements, code combinations. You can have lots of different mapping data sets from old segments to new segments. You want to make sure you're ensuring the standards, validating any of the properties, also addressing issues around allowing our business users to come in and do self-serve requests for changes, And then some of the other areas from a requirement standpoint is you want to view it before you commit it. So I want to see, okay, if I enter a new department, what's that going to look like an impact on our legacy system or on our new cloud ERP or our budgeting system? EDM allows you to do that. It gives you these application specific views, allows you to go in and look at, okay, here's a new set of data. Here's what it's going to look like in my planning and budgeting system. And then obviously you have things like, you want to schedule this for the future because maybe I'm working on next year's budget and I have these new department requests. I don't want it in today's year or this year, the current year. I need to push that out to a future year. So again, EDM helps you where you can set up and work on a future year separate from the current year and stage those all up so that when it comes time to pushing that out, you'll have that ability to quickly and push it out, and it's been collaborated and everybody's approved it. So let's broaden this out now. So we talked a little bit about department data. We started with roads. Now we're talking about departments. Well, there's a lot of data out there that everyone has to manage, whether it's financial, business, analytical, or even reference data that we have, the different data sets. And there's also different owners around that data. So the GL team, they might own, the accounts, department, location information. I apologize if I offend anybody that you don't own it. So hopefully, I'm not offending too many people out there. FP&A, maybe they own cost centers, but then again, I have clients that the HR owns cost centers. So I've seen conflict there. And it goes through, we see where this different sets of data is owned by different either applications or business users really behind the scenes on there. So you really got to focus on collaboration, bringing all this data together and where those intersections are. And that's really important for reporting, because you want to manage all those data so that you can get to that granular level of reporting on it, understanding the deep insight that you need from a business standpoint. Now, I did mention earlier that we have this Excel management, right? So we actually have had a couple of clients walk through the exercise of comparing Excel next to comparing it with how they manage it in the EDM. And the goal is to document the value that they're getting from the EDM system versus where they were historically. And so what this is, and these slides will be distributed, you could see here on the left-hand side where they have Excel, they have multiple Excel sheets they have to manage, one for each application maybe that's out there, and they kind of branch off into, multiple Excel sheets that then need to be pushed out, coordinated, and communicated. And there's amount of time just in that effort of managing it, not even in the decision point, but just actually once you've made the decision, how do I communicate that through versus EDM where, you made that decision, now you're communicating it out. But I would argue EDM not only just saved them time here, which they got like a 50% increase in time savings, but they also had a better collaboration and communication effect. So on the upfront side, when you're in there looking at that data, they were able to go ahead and see what that area is as far as the value and the benefits for it. So here you can see EDM again, versus Excel where the benefits are. And I see a Q&A session in there that popped up. It says, do I have a slide-by-slide comparison of DRM to DRG? I don't have it in this deck, but we will have it on tomorrow's session, but I will cover some of those things in the session today. So during the Q&A, I'll definitely walk you down through some of that as well, too. Okay. So with just a little bit about healthcare community around EDM usage. Right now, we have 30 plus clients that are utilizing this particular solution. We have over 200 clients across multiple industries that have been leveraging and jumping over to the cloud. Majority of the use cases have started with like ERP and EPM use cases, leveraging the pre-built adapters or the universal adapters that are out there. We have had a number of DRM converts. So we've, and I got some great use cases. So if you ever want to meet with me, I'll walk you through some of the specifics of it. But we even have an approach where you can start a hybrid role. So you can keep your DRM asset in place, start to bring up EDM and slowly migrate over to it. And so we've done that with a few clients already, even some very large clients, and they are very, very happy with EDM to date. The implementation scopes, many of them have a non-Oracle application in it as well. So again, EDM is application agnostic. So it's designed to work with any system, not just the Oracle system. So you want to think about that from a use case perspective of rolling that out. So whether it's a project management system that I have a client using that it's a non-Oracle system, and frankly, it's actually a very difficult system for them to actually even try to get an integration to because it just doesn't have the modern technology associated with it. But they were able to tie it in with their EDM footprint to help them manage data across that. I have a time and attendance applications that we're using EDM across. Non-cloud Oracle, non-Oracle ERPs, so the SAPs that are out there, M4s, et cetera. Clinical systems, we have clients that are rolling this out, starting to pick specific areas of data where they're synchronizing across the clinical areas. And then obviously ServiceNow, that's another big one that a number of our clients have just added EDM into the mix around the ServiceNow messaging and communication there. Other use cases, obviously you've heard this before, multiple hierarchies. If I make an update in one, I want those to be propagated out to other hierarchies that I may be managing. Code combinations, use cases, having multiple segments. I need to merge these together, maybe into, from 2 segments in my PeopleSoft system to 3 segments now in Oracle Cloud. Mappings, a common one there. Even now starting in areas where I'm seeing that, because we have segmented data and maybe the legacy ERP was communicating that out to like an application access system or a badging system or something like that. They're starting to tie that in, just pointing it at EDM so that it knows that if someone creates a new department and that new department eventually creates a new facility, well, they're gonna have to deal with issues like this and, what permissions and what access do they get. Then another nice one, interesting one we came across was with a PeopleSoft client is that they're using EDM to basically, take the chart of accounts, and as they wind off of PeopleSoft, then eventually they're going to sunset it here in the near future, but they're going to keep the chart of accounts in there because they had a number of legacy systems that were tied to that PeopleSoft chart of accounts, the segments that were in there, and they didn't want to necessarily go out there and have to or be forced to modify all those systems to the new chart structure that they were putting in the Oracle Cloud financials that they're rolling out. So what they decided to do is, hey, let's clone the PeopleSoft chart accounts. That way we'll just have those legacy systems pointed to EDM to understand what those the current environment looks like and where those relationships are. But then going forward, they'll slowly start to migrate them over to the cloud ERP. Again, that was about accelerating the deployment, getting the new cloud ERP rolled out faster. So now let's get into some interesting things there around EDM. So here's some considerations that you want to be paying attention to when you're implementing or thinking about even acquiring EDM. Focus on building value, right? What are the value benefits? Who are the people that are going to be involved from it? Who would this solution benefit for? It's not just an IT solution. It's definitely from a usability now. We're seeing many more business users being called to actually come in, do a request for something as simple as a department or a new cost center or a new cost center change. You want to map that out. So many clients, again, have Excel forms. And so you want to look at, okay, how many applications that are we managing in Excel? What can we replace and consolidate and start to utilize EDM? So that we can get proactive about managing that data and look at the value that this can bring here. Also understand which teams have a vested interest in data. There's different individuals within the different teams and departments across these business units that have vested interest in data. So you want to bring them in as part of the process to understand, are we meeting your requirements? If I create a new department, what happens to your team? And understand that. What do you need to be notified of? And who needs to be part of that approval process so that you're at least notified and you're approving to some extent on this new information that's coming at you. And again, don't forget about the non-Oracle systems. This is a big area of value that many of our clients really haven't fully tapped yet. So they've rolled it out maybe across Oracle ERP and EPM, but they haven't gone after the non-Oracle systems. And that's kind of, to me, some low-hanging fruit there, because if those applications are dependent on that core data coming from ERP, you can channel it through EDM and just communicate that out right away. Other things here, understand that a tactical need around, might determine the timing of a purchase when it relates to EDM, but strategic use cases also make up the big difference in value. So, I might have a segmentation strategy problem where I got 2 segments in my legacy system, 3 in my new one, as far as my core ERP, and I need to address that from a mapping standpoint. But, it's the fact that we're going to continue to do merger and acquisitions that I would love to bring EDM in, because we can accelerate and bring those acquisitions on even further. So balance that out as you're thinking about, the different options that you have as far as acquiring it. Implementation is not a boil the ocean approach. So we have seen many clients go in very, very siloed focus. I even had one client start with department data only. That's all they did. They rolled that out, they got that out, and they learned a ton about EDM. They liked it so much, they turned off their DRM system. So it's definitely not one that you have to feel like I got to redo the whole thing. No, you can start very small, start focus, and then allow it to grow over time there. Consider the resources of who will use EDM, whether that's not just IT, but it's these savvy business users that we're now seeing that are taking more and more ownership of it. It's becoming like a source of truth for them. So IT is still involved, right? So there's but they look at this more as a monitoring service. I've set up the rules of engagement for how you are to key in data. EDM is going to go and validate that to make sure that, I'm staying at the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. I'm staying on my right lane, and, I'm going in the right direction. And that's what this is designed to do. So we establish the rules of the road, and as long as the people are following that, they get to key in that data and have it go through the approval cycles and get it keyed in. So, and then the other area IT we see there where they're involved is around the integration side. Again, those are typically one-time efforts to integrate the solutions together, but it is typically some need that might be out there from time to time. Identify clear business owner for the solution. So again, there's definitely a lot of collaborative, even a governance body that might benefit from using this solution. They might ultimately end up being the owner of their. So, and then the last thing here from a consideration is integration, is not the end all be all. So it doesn't preclude you from using EDM. You can actually benefit from EDM even if you don't have full integration into a particular solution. Remember, many clients today are managing their data in Excel, and they sometimes just export the data from Excel and then import it into the application. Well, EDM can produce that as same Excel file and allow you to just import that in. Or in other cases, I have clients that are still manually keying data. So getting it fully integrated, yeah, that's a great, long-term objective you want to have, but depending on where you're at and what systems you're using, you can benefit from the collaboration side of EDM and just keep the manual process in place for doing the updates around it. Real quick, we'll talk about a few of the pitfalls that we've seen out there. So one of the obvious ones is I've seen some implementations that just lack a focus on collaboration, right? So they get caught up in the integration side and they want everything to be synchronized and tied together, and they're not talking to the business community about what collaborative needs that they need around their data. And they're focused more on limited sets of data versus having a full picture of the data for the business users to make decisions on. So again, that goes back to that whole, we don't have to have integration right out day one in order to benefit from this. Other things, don't forget about the design, modeling, and impact ripple analysis that occurs. So if I make a change on one system, what's the ripple effect to downstream systems? So how's that communicated? Well, EDM has a great metaphor, great way of using that internally here. And a case in point here, you don't need an integration to do a chart of account redesign. I can take an extract of data from any system, start to work on the chart of accounts, the new chart that maybe we're migrating to, doing the chart of account redesign, giving everybody a collaborative platform to work on, to track those audit changes, see who approved them, see what the structures were before and what they will be in the future. And I don't necessarily have to have a full one-on-one integration into it. As I talked to a partner today, he was mentioning to me, he's like, look, integration's the small piece when they really think of it from a project standpoint. It's more of getting the teams involved in collaboration, working on having effective communications and deciding what is that new chart going to look like. That's the big hurdle that they have to overcome there. And EDM is really complementary to giving everybody keeping on the same page. Another pitfall is the one user syndrome, again, where we buy or we sell the solution and it turns out only then one person ends up using it. They never push it out to their business community. And that could be for numerous reasons, but it's just sometimes they think of it as an integration only tool for Oracle ERP to EPM and not as a business collaborative solution. So again, focus on that. Also, common attributes. We've heard this over before where the client will focus on common attributes that are shared between applications. but it doesn't help the business from essential attributes that they need to make decisions about the whole process. So again, you'll have to work to find a balance of what information do you need to gather when you're building out the EDM solution to give you that optimal sense of agility that you need internally there. And then one of the common ones that many people forget about is the design use case, source of truth, and training. So I have a number of clients that are using this. They actually go to it daily to show business users like, okay, you know, we're migrating onto a new system. Here's what the new structures looks like. Here's what it's going to look like in your view. And they're actually using EDM to show them those structures to get their teams familiar with how those financial structures and the roll-ups and the hierarchies all look like. So again, those are big benefits that clients have that they can jump to. Another area which we'll touch on here a little bit deeper in the next few minutes is the limiting your scope and use cases based off of pricing and licensing metrics. And this is a delicate topic, and I know many clients are sensitive to it because it impacts price. But you also have to understand that, you know, if you're worried about that, that could also start to impact your use cases. Well, you have to understand what impacts price and what doesn't, and how you can actually grow the EDM solution without necessarily negatively impacting your licensing costs on it. So understanding the subscriptions pricing it's a reality from Oracle as far as, you know, any of the cloud solution providers that are out there. There's lots of benefits with this. That said, though, you have to investigate the options. And I'm going to have more to come on that in a future slide here that we'll talk about that. We're going to pull that onion and kind of pull it apart so you get a little bit more understanding. And then lastly, somebody like Interrel, right? You got to choose the right partner. Get a partner that has experience with EDM, not just implementing it for like ERP to EPM, but also from the vision that you have of, you know, your non-Oracle systems and pushing this out and collaborating across teams. And that's where great partners like Interrel come into play, and that they can bring their expertise there of how they can actually roll this out. All right, so let's talk about the fun topic here, the big elephant in the room, which is the pricing, right? So from a licensing perspective, EDM can be acquired a number of different ways. The two primary and what I would consider the best options is to buy it through what we call standalone metrics. And there's two options there. It's either through hosted record, which gives you a, you know, unlimited company employee access, but, you know, you're limited on the employees, or I'm sorry, on the records. Let me correct myself. So maybe I buy 10,000 records. So that's all I'm going to be allowed to use within the EDM framework. Or you could buy it on a hosted employee metric, which sometimes many of our clients are not aware of. But what that is that can give you unlimited record access. So you can load up as many records as you want, but you're just, the metric that we're using is based off the number of employees for the organization. I would compare both of those and see and understand, you know, your benefits, pros and cons for each. And I have a slide here coming up that'll walk through a little bit of that. EDM is also offered through the EPM suite. So you have two options there, and it's important to understand these options because it might dictate which direction you go as well. So through the hosted user license metric, there is a small subset of EDM that's included. It's limited to 5,000 records, so it's very restricted. And I'll talk about that in more details in a minute. But there's also the hosted employee, which gives you unlimited records there as well. Again, I'm going to qualify all this, safe harbor, any of this, all of this could change at any point from Oracle's perspective. So if I was to net this out when I'm walking and talking to the client through it, the two green areas are highlighted in green are the hosted record and the hosted employee. And you have some minimums you have to pay attention to. So from a record standpoint, you would buy minimum 5,000. You can then buy blocks of 1,000 over and above that. So the pros for this is it can be a lower cost entry getting into EDM for many of our clients. The con to it is obviously you potentially could run into some records, you know, where you start to exceed the number of records that you're using. So that you want to pay attention to. So and consider what your long-term gain and goals are for the using this system. Also, initially, I'm going to be honest, record counting and estimating records can be confusing for some clients. So be patient, take some time to understand how do we actually count records. We'll walk you through it. We're happy to go and give you examples of that. I'm not going to do it here because it would be a rat hole. It would take too much time to go down in there. But if you have questions around that, that's what we're here to support you on. And then because of those concerns, some of our clients are always worried about, those licensing implications. I'm limited on the number of records, so I don't want to grow the scope of EDM too much. But then you might be curtailing your value from that standpoint. So again, you got to work through those and balances that out. Here's your applicable part number and your service description as they call it out. EDM hosted employee. Now, again, this is a little bit different. So again, you have minimum 5,000 employees that you have to license out of the box. It goes up to actually what is the size of your organization. And that's how we would basically just use it as a metric. And you have no limit on the records, right? So, and I like to think of it as not just a no limit on the records, but no limit on the use cases. So that if I need to bring in a badging system, I need to bring in some other timekeeping systems, I can start to bring those on and incorporate that into all this data and understand how that amoeba of data within our organization works. So some cons to it is, yes, it could be considered initially expensive. It's definitely, if you go that route, it is more expensive than the record basis. But over time, your cost per record could be cheaper. So you want to take that into consideration. Other things that can impact this from a concern standpoint, well, if you're a rapidly growing organization, you got a lot of merger and acquisitions occurring. If you're on the employee metric, that could trigger an expansion license that you may need to buy. And again, the part numbers are off to the right. Now, for the last two, which is part of the EDM, part of the EPM suite, this first one is probably the most confusing for many of our clients. And really what it was intended to allow our clients that invest in the EPM suite to get the basically, a sandbox environment of EDM. So there's a fixed 5,000. I do say fixed because you can't expand it. It's a limited 5,000 records of EDM that is included with the EPM suite on the hosted user basis. And I like to say, hey, it's a try it before you buy it. You can go in, stand it up. There are some limitations there, though. Obviously, the first one being limited 5,000 records. You should consider that if you're going to go beyond the 5,000, or if right off the gate, I would just go and license it right away, because migrating, and you will have to migrate from that 5,000 included to the license metric, which is either one of the top two SKUs up above, if you're going to exceed that 5,000 records there that's included with the hosted user of EPM. So it is a project. You got to migrate off. It's a minor project, but it is a project, so I'm not going to lie to you. And then also, you're limited to the users that have access to EPM. So that's another key consideration that you want to take in and think about. Consider it as a sandbox, I like to say. And if your record needs are really low, maybe it works for you. So, and then lastly is the hosted employee metric for EPM. Again, this is a not often sold product within Oracle, because I'm going to be honest, it's a pretty pricey option to give everybody access to EPM. And it does include unlimited records for EDM there. That is an option, but it does require senior level approvals within Oracle if somebody is interested in it. So there's no guarantees that will be offered. Okay, so wrapping up everything. I appreciate everyone's time. Sorry for the delay there in getting started. Collaboration on data is key for success, right? Whether you're doing a transformational change, is like migrating from Hyperion, going up to EPM, going from, if you have a hybrid of cloud and on-premise coexistence, or you're just doing some system rationalization, right? Or maybe it's a transformation on the business side, like doing a merger and acquisition. Those are big things that you, again, think about redesigning that freeway. EDM becomes invaluable in those particular areas. But it also is designed to handle the routine changes and making sure that we're keeping track and doing the right things, keeping the validations, the auditing around, things like doing physical location, a new clinic or new project, et cetera. So those routine changes can be managed in EDM as well. So again, if you're here in this point where you're redesigning that freeway and you got to do it while still, bringing everybody down to a 2-lane or 1-lane road, you definitely want to consider EDM, because that can help accelerate these projects. It's a place where you can put all this data and it's your go-to point. It's your source of truth. So that okay, hey, this is the structure we're going with. Or if you need to make changes to it, we're going to get everybody's approval what these changes are going to look like. So, and then the beauty thing of it is when you're rolling out these projects, they can turn into a work of art. Anybody know what this particular intersection is? Maybe some of you might know. But if you don't, for those road buffs there, this happens to be a major interchange in Dubai, where they built this beautiful interchange of these windy roads and trail systems, rail systems, and actually when it's in full bloom, and decorative, it's a really pretty scenic interchange. Not something you would commonly say about an interchange there, but I do appreciate everybody's time today, and I would say that changes constantly happen, so don't consider that we're going to be parking here, because we got to keep always going. So there's no parking, as is change is always happening. So again, thanks for everybody. I'll take a minute or two for Q&A. Sorry that we cut you short due to the problem getting started there. I see somebody posted a question there. It said, can you clarify the meaning of hosted employee and how does Oracle count this number again? So, basic way that I would say is that, if you consider if you bought off a hosted employee metric before from Oracle, whether that's like on your ERP or your HCM environment, and they are totaling up the number of employees, that would be the metric that we would be using there. Again, it's not to say that every employee is going to have access to EDM. It's just used as a metric from a licensing perspective. Another question that came out. Let me see here. I think those were all it. Any other questions before we wrap up? I see some chat out there. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll give it back to Trish. Thanks again, everyone, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I don't see any questions in the Q&A at this moment. So please go ahead and enter your questions since we have Darren live with us. I do have a couple of questions that I think might be worth covering. I know you've mentioned some of these slightly, but we did open up this session to the public. So we may have attendees that may not actually be Oracle customers. So I did want to ask and clarify a question there. You mentioned that EDM, again, can be application agnostic. So to clarify that, does that mean you can use EDM with other ERP systems?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a number of clients that use EDM because it's really about data management, right? Even though we call it enterprise data management, I think it's probably a better stated to say it's management of enterprise data. So it's a process control tool, and we use it with a number of different ERP instances and solutions. So I'll mention a few of the top ones, like SAP, and we also have Infor. Lawson is, some of you may know it as well. So we have clients using it with those, also with Workday, and some of the classic Oracle solutions like EBS and PeopleSoft, and obviously our new cloud solution as well. So,
and
I saw a question get posted there too.
It was just no questions. Just saw the presentation that delivered at K-Scope.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So appreciate that. I do have another question. You mentioned something specific about that EDM could speed a migration to cloud. Can you kind of expand on that? Exactly how that could be used?
Yeah, so we have a number of projects underway with clients. And obviously, there's a strategy and a purpose for what they're trying to do with going to cloud. So I think I always recommend a client, know your strategy, understand what your goals are and objectives from taking your existing systems on-prem and moving them to the cloud. In some cases, it's a point solution that moves to the cloud. Other times, it's a holistic strategy of where you want to go and what your target is. Along the way, obviously you have to deal with data. At some point, you're going to need to deal with the data. Obviously, everybody gets excited about the new cloud technologies and reports and everything that's there. And then you get into the project and you realize, oh, okay, I need to go and start to address the data itself, right? The organizational structures, the department structures, the ownership of that, and being able to have a solution like EDM, which can take your existing assets that you have on your existing on-premise solutions, and then start to map that over to what it will look like in the cloud, because it's not going to be a one-for-one. I don't care which ERP you move to or which EPM solution you move to, it's not going to be a one-to-one. And often you don't want it to be a one-to-one. You want to leverage the new technologies and what the capabilities that they're delivering in the cloud. So whether that's restructuring something as simple as your expense accounts and how you codify those, or if it's larger from a planning and budgeting, again, you're going to need to address the data. EDM allows you to start there, capture all the changes that you're making, understand the reasons for those changes so you can document that in there as well. And so then later on down the road, when you get those auditors show up and they say, hey, why did you make these changes? What was the reasons? You can immediately go into EDM, you can see that. Second big thing there from going to the cloud, it gives you the visualization for each of your applications to make sure that you're addressing all the data needs specific to those applications that you're moving into the cloud. So again, EDM, it's application agnostic, but it also gives you these application containers. So I can build data in an application sense. So a couple of key points there that I just want to emphasize.
Appreciate that. Any other questions we might have for Darren?
One thing that I will just want to address, often we'll get, and this is following up on one of your first ones, and I saw it in my presentation, is many clients will ask, oh, can you use this with XYZ, whether it's like a non-Oracle system or it's a different solution out there. And immediately our mind jumps to integration. And I'm guilty of that. I'm going to be honest. I'm very, very guilty. My first thought is, how do we integrate the tools? And I forget that, come back to the core of what the solution does. It's a data management tool. So really the answer to the question is from a use case perspective, that's what you want to focus on. So can I use it with a different system? Yes. What's the use case of it? Well, I just want to take the department data and push it over to that system. Answer would be yes, because from an integration standpoint, the integrations are just a one-time. Typically, it's a very quick type of creation and configuration that you build into a solution. What you really want to focus on is the communication collaboration process of data ownership, getting it from one system and pushed over and communicated to another when those changes occur. So I just want to touch on that, so that, because I realized as I listened to myself present again, or I'll say my twin, I mentioned in that presentation that, somebody asked the question, hey, can you use this with EBS? And I answered yes, and I quickly jumped into the adapter, which is great. We have that pre-built adapter, but I should have really emphasized the use cases around that as well too. So.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. I know I ran across a unique situation recently where a client had a separate HCM solution and a separate vendor for ERP, and HCM was in charge and uses position management, which really caused a lot of issues with changes when the HCM team made changes in those positions, and of course how that rolled out to finance. So this is definitely a great use case for that as well.
Yeah, one of my clients that's been a long time user, they're an M4 shop. They actually call our solution the best hierarchy management solution out there in the market, hands down. So it is, if you have hierarchies, whether that's in HCM or if that's in finance ERP, this is a great solution for it. And obviously the reason why we're often in finance is because of the auditors, for the compliance, from a regulatory standpoint, from the needs of balancing across multiple reporting structures that you have to report across, and you want to keep all that in alignment. And that's what EDM is really focused in. We zone in on that. We try to be the expert in that hierarchy management and that data management world. So obviously, I think we're at the top of the hour, but I'm more than happy to hang over here a few extra minutes if anyone has any questions. So
Thanks
just
everyone for joining. And if you'd like, please, you can submit a request for us to send you the recording of this session. And once again, even though I've listened to it before, Darren, I've learned something new. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.